We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 102a. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that the Mokum HaMezuzah, the place for the mezuzah, is the responsibility of the socher. That's the responsibility of the renter, because it does not require a professional. And the reason why it does not require a professional is because you don't necessarily need to drill into the stone of the doorpost. Rather, you can place it beguvsa dekanya. You can put it into a reed, into the hollow of a reed, and then essentially hang that on the doorpost. And therefore, again, it's the responsibility of the socher. Rashi says, beguvsa dekanya, you put it into the hollow of the reed, vitolo, son, you just hang it there, and that can be sufficient for a mezuzah. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hamaskir bayis lechaveiro, if a person rents a house to his friend, al hasocher lasos lo mezuzah, it's the responsibility of the renter to make the mezuzah. Uchashu yotze, and when the renter is leaving, lo yitlena biyado v'yotze, he shouldn't take it with him and go, meaning he has to leave the mezuzahs there. Uminachri, now if he's renting the house from a non-Jew, so then notla biyado v'yotze, he is allowed to take the mezuzahs with him and leave. And the Brisa says, Umaisa be'echad, there was an incident with one person, shenatala biyado v'yotze, that he actually took the mezuzahs with him, v'kav arishto shnei banav, and he ended up burying his wife and his two sons, meaning to say that was the punishment. And the Gemara says, Ma'isa lister, well, it sounds like you're bringing the incident to contradict what you just said, because the line right before was that if you're renting it from a non-Jew, you are allowed to take it, and then you bring a story where apparently the person was not supposed to take it, and the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Aresha, that story is going on the first part of the Brisa, meaning it's going on the part of the Brisa where you're renting from a Jewish person. There you are not supposed to take the mezuzahs. And Rashi says, Aresha socher mi Yisrael have. Again, that was a person renting from a Jew. The Tanya Resha, because we learned in the Brisa at the beginning, lo yitlena biyado v'yotze, that the person shouldn't take the mezuzahs with him. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hazevel shel balabayis, the manure belongs to the balabayis. And the renter, he only gets the ashes that come from the oven and the stove. And the Gemara says, B'may askinan, what exactly is the case? If you're going to say the case is that the courtyard, besides for the house, but the courtyard also was rented to the renter, and the oxen that are producing the manure, they belong to the renter, so amai shel balabayis, why should the manure belong to the balabayis? Certainly in such a scenario, the socher should get the manure. Rather, you'll say the courtyard is not being rented to the socher, and the oxen belong to the maskir. So then the Gemara says, Pshita, then it's obvious, of course, the maskir is going to get the zevel in that case. And so the Gemara says, Lo no tzricha, it's necessary. B'chotzer de maskir v'torei da'asam alma kamubo. We're talking about the courtyard belonging to the maskir, and the oxen are coming from the outside, and essentially the chotzer of the maskir is acquiring the zevel. And the Gemara says, Messiah Leila Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, this would support what Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said. Diyama Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said, Chatzero Shaladam Konelo Shalomi Daito, that the courtyard of a person can acquire things for him even without his knowledge. And Rashi explains, initially the Gemara said, Vitore de maskir, if we're talking about the oxen of the maskir, the kaven de lo ogre, since he didn't rent the chotzer to the socher, mistama de Torah de maskir have it, but it makes sense to say that it's the oxen of the maskir that are in the chotzer. And then the Gemara ultimately said, B'chotzer de maskir, we're talking about the courtyard of the maskir, shalo hisker as a chotzer, he didn't rent out the chotzer. Vitore de aso mi'alman, we're talking about oxen that come from the outside, ustam gelolim afkurim afkurinu bailim, and in general, when it comes to manure, that's made ownerless by the owners. V'kanyale chatzero, and therefore his chotzer acquires it for him. V'afilu kodam hasocher v'yigbia, now even if the socher goes ahead and lifts it up first, lo zacha behen, he does not take possession, because the chotzer is kona. And we'll take a look at the Gra over here. The Gra says, Rashi divrei maskil b'chotzer de maskir shalo. Again, Rashi said it's the courtyard of the maskir because the maskir didn't rent out the courtyard to the socher. Nira bitzido avol Rambam kasav. The Gra says that the Rambam says afilu hiskiru. We're talking even in a situation where he did rent it out, still it's considered the chotzer of the maskir. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa, Mamar kol Metzias sheyavo l'socho hayom, tikna li chatzeri. If somebody says all of the lost objects that enter my courtyard today should be acquired by my courtyard, lo amar klum, he hasn't said anything, and the kinyan will not be effective. And the Gemara says, V'misal hadam Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, but if it's true, what Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said above, Chatzer shaladam kona lo shalom idaito, that the courtyard of a person can acquire something without his knowledge, amai lo amar klum, why hasn't he said anything? That should be a good kinyan. And the Gemara says, Hacha b'mayaskin, and here in this brisa, what are we talking about? B'chotzer she'ena mishtameres. We're talking about a chotzer that is not secure. That kind of chotzer cannot create a kinyan. But the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, I'm a seifa. Let's look at the end of that brisa. It says, Yatsa lo shem Metzia Ba'ir. Let's say the rumor spread in the city that there's a lost object in that chotzer, so then devar of kayam, and so then already we say that what he said is effective. Vi b'chotzer she'enim mishtameres. Now, if it's a courtyard that's not secure, ki Yatsa lo shem Metzia Ba'ir, just because people know about the fact that there's this lost object, everyone in the city knows, my have it, what difference does it make? And the Gemara answers to that, Kevan Yatsa lo shem Metzia Ba'ir, since everyone in the city knows about this Metziah, Mivdal bedili inshi mina, so people separate from it, v'havelok echatzer mishtameres, and then it has the status of a chatzer mishtameres, of a secure courtyard. And Rashi explains, Yatsa lo shem Metzia Ba'ir means to say, Sheyatsa kol Ba'ir, that the rumor, the word goes out in the city, Shebot tzvi shavor b'soch sadeo, that there was a deer, had a broken leg, and it's in his field, O min hanor heitzev l'soch adagim, or fish came, and they were swept in from the river flooded, and they were swept into his field, and so therefore, again, you have a situation where the rumors go out, the word goes out in the city that these items, these lost animals, these lost objects are in his property, and therefore we consider it already to be a chatzer mishtameres, because they're going to separate themselves from those objects. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following brisa, Zevel hayotze min hatanur u min hakirayim, if you have manure that comes from the oven or the stove, v'hakolet min ha'avir, and let's say the renter, he catches the manure in the airspace of the chatzer, harehu shalo, that is his. V'sheberefes v'shebechatzer, but if you have the manure in the cowshed or in the courtyard, shel balabayas, that belongs to the landlord. And the Gemara says, "V'misa lahad the Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina." If it's true what Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina said above, the Yamar Chatzer Shel Adam Kona Lo Shlomidaito, he said that the chatzer of a person acquires something without his knowledge. So kolate mayavir, in the case where the person catches it in the airspace, amai harehu shalo. Why does it belong to him? Why does it belong to the renter? Avir chatzeru, that's the airspace of his chatzer. It's the airspace of the landlord's chatzer, and so therefore the landlord should be the one that owns the manure. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya says, B'mad b'kli b'shulei par. The case over here is that the person, the renter, attaches the vessel that's going to catch the manure to the rear of the cow, and therefore it never travels through the airspace at all. It goes directly into the vessel of the renter, and the renter acquires it. And the Gemara continues with another answer. Rava Amar Rava says, Avir shein sofa lanuach. If you have airspace, but it's not going to come to rest in that chotzer, it's going to drop into the vessel of the renter. Lav kimunach dami, that does not have the status of resting in the courtyard, and therefore again it belongs to the renter. But the Gemara continues, Umi pshita le Rava, but is that really obvious to Rava? V'hami boy boila, but Rava actually asked that as a question. The boy Rava, because Rava asked, Zarak arniki, if a person throws a purse bepesach zeh through this door, v'yatsasa bepesach zeh, and it goes out the other door, and the case is that he's mafkir the purse. The question is if the airspace, the person who owns this airspace acquires it from hefker. So he asked, Mahu, what's the halacha? Avir shein sofa lanuach kemunach dami. Here you have a case where it's in the airspace, but it's not going to come to rest in this space. Is that considered kemunach? Olav kemunach dami, or is it not considered to be at rest? And so here you see that Rava had that as a question. And the Gemara answers to that, Hasam over there, lo mifsak v'lo midi. There's nothing that is separating between the item and coming to rest on the bottom. There's no vessel between the item and the earth. But over here, mifsak kli, here you have a vessel where again, ultimately it's going to come to rest in the vessel. The vessel is essentially a separation. It's a barrier between the manure and the earth. And that's why in this particular case, we certainly say, according to Rava, avir shein sofo lanuach is lav kemunach dami. And the Gemara continues, v'sheberefes v'shebechatzer. It said in the brisa that if it's in the cowshed or if it's in the courtyard, harei elu shel balabayis, that belongs to the balabayis, it belongs to the landlord. And the Gemara says, Tarti, the two of these things, meaning Merefes and Chatzer, the way Tosas learn is it's going to be a contradiction. We'll see Rashi and Tosas in a moment. And the Gemara answers to this. Amar Abaya says, Hachi Kamer, this is what the Brisa means to say. V'sheb Merefes sheb Chatzer, the cowshed in the courtyard, Harei Elu shel balabayis, that belongs to the balabayis. And the Gemara says on that, Amar Ravashi says, Zos Omeres, this proves, Hamaskir Chatzero Stam, that when somebody rents out his courtyard, Lo Hiskir Refes Sheba, he's not renting out the cowshed, and that's why that belongs to the landlord. And Rashi explains, V'hakolet min ha'avir, if the person catches it in the airspace, meaning, Shakibel Gelolim L'soch Kli, that he catches the galolim, the manure, in a vessel, shenasan kli ba'aver, that he puts this vessel in the airspace, v'kibel galolim b'soch, and essentially catches the manure in it. So then shalo, that belongs to him, shal socher, that belongs to the renter. And in contrast, if it is the manure in the cowshed or the courtyard, kasal gadaitach. Now Rashi says, right now we think we're talking about a courtyard that was not rented by the maskir. The landlord, he still owns the courtyard. B'shulei para, then it said that the case could be where he's putting the vessel in the rear, to the rear of the cow. Samach l'nekave, the leka aver. There is no airspace. It goes directly from the animal into the vessel. Zarak arniki, and then we had the question of Rava, if he throws a purse. The person throwing it says it's hefker, it's considered ownerless for anyone who comes first. So there we said that Rava had a question whether the airspace is a kinyan or not. And then the Gemara said, when it comes to refes and chotzer, tarti. Now, the way Rashi understands tarti is bitmiyah. This is a question. Tarti itzricha l'tana lemisni. Why do you have to even teach both of these cases? It's the same thing. Lisni chada, just teach one of them. Kevan devishalo hiskir askinon. Since we're talking where he did not rent out the courtyard, mali refes mali chotzer. So what's the difference if it's the cowshed or if it's the courtyard? It's exactly the same. And Rashi continues. The Gemara then answered sheba refes sheba chotzer. We're talking about the cowshed in the chotzer, meaning hamuskeres l'socher, meaning the chotzer is rented to the renter. Kol hazevel sheberefes sheba, but all of the manure in the cowshed labal habayis, that goes to the landlord. And then v'yashminan, so then the Bryce is teaching us to hamaskeres hachotzer, just because somebody rents out the chotzer lo hisker refes sheba, that does not mean that he has rented out the cowshed in the chotzer. And Tosas explained tarti, the two of them perished the sasran hadadi, meaning the two statements refes and chotzer actually contradict one another. That's usually what tarti means in the Gemara. Now, how is that a contradiction? To say refes and chotzer both go to the maskir, the haisha berefes lo itzrich lemisne legufe, because you don't need to say refes at all. The pshitahu de socher bayis bechotzer she'ein lo berefes klum. It's obvious that somebody that rents a house in a chotzer is not going to get the cowshed. Velo tana ela lamedek. So the only reason that's even in the brisa is to infer from there sheberefes lebal habayis lefi she'ein bo lesocher klum avol bechotzer sheyesh lesocher bahiloch kenisa v'yatzil lebeso lo have the bal habayis. It must be for the inference that the refes, the cowshed, so that belongs to the balabayas because the socher doesn't have any stake in the cowshed. But the chotzer, the courtyard where the socher is going to be walking through when he goes in and out of the house, must be an inference that does not go to the balabayas. But then it says explicitly in the brisa she'af shebechotzer lebalabayas, that even the manure in the chotzer goes to the balabayas. That's the contradiction. Essentially, the inference from refes contradicts what it says about the actual chotzer. And then again, the Gemara answers that what the brisa really means is just the refes in the chotzer, the manure in that refes belongs to the balabayas. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following brisa, Yone shovach v'yone aliyah, if you have doves in the dovecote and doves in the attic, chayavos b'shiluach, there is an obligation of shiluach hakan, meaning to say you have to send away the mother bird if you are going to take the eggs. V'asuros begezel, and it's also prohibited to take them, and that's considered to be stealing. However, it's not gezel gama, rather memnei darchei shalom, it's just to keep the peace. That's why it's considered to be stealing if you take them. And the Gemara says, V'im isa. Now, if it is really true, Lahad Amar Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina, that which Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina said above, Chatzer Shaladam Kone Lo Shalom Idaito, that the Chatzer of a person can acquire something without his knowledge. So Kari Kan, so we should apply over here the following verse. The pasuk says, when it comes to Shiluach Hakan Ki Kore, which means to say that the eggs are not readily accessible to you. You happen upon the eggs, Prat Lemezum, that excludes a case where it's considered to be readily accessible. What the Gemara means to say is, if it's true that the owner of the chotzer essentially owns these eggs, because chatzeru shaladam kone lo shalomi daito, so there should not be an obligation of shiluach hakan. That's what we learn from ki kare prat lemezuman. And Rashi explains yone shovach, the doves of the dovecote, shemevakshim is onosein besader. We're talking about doves that look for food in the fields, v'kanein b'shovach, and their nest is in the dovecote. Ve'ein elu yone hardasios hagadelim bebatim. We're not talking here about doves that are raised in the house. So the Brisa said, Chayavin b'shiluach, there is an obligation of b'shiluach hakan, there's an obligation of shiluach hakan, im rovetzatz ala beitzim, de lo karina behen, that's what the Mesoras Hashas says, it should be de lo karina behen ki kare prat mezumin, de lav mezumin ninu. We don't apply here the exclusion when it is mezumin, when it's accessible, because these are not considered owned, they're not considered accessible. And the Gemara then asked, but karikan ki kare prat mezumin, why don't we apply prat mezumin in this case if the chotzer acquires it on his behalf? V'kevan de habeitzim shalo, since the eggs belong to him, Havale hakan mezumin, that should be called the kan is mezumin. To kan hu habeitzim, because the kan, that refers to the eggs, and therefore again, if the eggs are owned by him because his chotzer makes a kinyan, therefore we should say pratlam mezumin, and there is no shiluach hakan in this case. And we will take a look at Tosas as well. Tosas say pratlam mezumin to exclude when it's readily accessible, when it's owned. V'yim tomer, if you're going to ask, v'amaylo parach nami misefa, why not ask from the end of the brisa as well? If we're saying that the chotzer acquires these eggs, amay asur mimnei darchei shalom, why is it only prohibited to take the eggs because of darchei shalom, to keep the peace? Gezel gomer have it, that's actual stealing, because the person's chotzer acquired the eggs, and therefore he's the owner. Of course he can't take it. And Tosas say to that, v'yesh lomar demei reisha nichalei lemifrach, we just want to ask, we prefer to ask from the reisha. V'hu adin dematzi parach misefa, we could have asked the question also from the end of the brisa, that also would have been a question. Inami, Tosas says, or you could say, lo matzi lemifrach misefa, we can't ask a question from the seifa. The equal lememer, because you could explain the seifa where it says it's prohibited to take it from darchei shalom, to hachi kamar, that this is what the brisa means to say at the end. Asuros mishum gezel gomor, it's asur because of real stealing, it really is considered stealing. Habeitzim, that's going on the eggs. The eggs really are owned by the owner of the courtyard. V'imon, but when it comes to the mother bird, mimnei darchei shalom, so that's only because of darchei shalom. There it's not considered that it's owned, it's not really in the chotzer, it's not really secured in the chotzer, so to speak, and therefore taking the mother bird is just stealing mipnei darchei shalom. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rava, Rava says, the reason why there's a mitzvah of shiluach hakan in this case is because beitza b'yatzias ruba hu di'chayva la b'shiluach. When it comes to an egg, when the majority of the egg comes out of the mother bird, that's when there sets in the obligation of shiluach hakan. However, umikna lo kanya, but there's no kinyan, there's no acquisition, ad nofla lechatzero, until it actually falls into his courtyard. V'chikatani chayavos b'shiluach, and when we say in the brisa that there's an obligation of shiluach hakan in this case, mekam made the that's before the egg actually falls into the chotzer. And Rashi explains, B'yatzias ruba, when the majority of the eggs come out, karina behen obeitzim, that's when we can apply the pasuk of obeitzim. V'im hayabol lispos kodem shetikmar yatzias, if he wants to take them before they finish coming out, chayiv l'shaleach ha'em, then he has to send away the mother bird, v'likach habonim, and take the offspring. And the Gemara continues, Ihachi, if so, amay asuros mishum gezel, if the case over here is that the eggs haven't fully come out, and they don't belong to the owner of the chotzer, why is there a prohibition of gezel? And the Gemara answers, Ha'imon, we're going on the mother bird. And Rashi explains, Amaya Asurus Mishum Gezel, Kevan de lo nafla lechatzer, if the eggs didn't fall to his chotzer, why is there a prohibition of Gezel? And the Gemara answers, Ha'imon, we're going on the mother bird. Kilomar, what it means to say is, Gezel de darchei shalom afilu, Ha'imon nami kamar. When we talk about Gezel, we're talking about Gezel of darchei shalom, and that goes on the mother as well. De daito shel bal hashovach aleim, because the owner of the dovecote, he's thinking about them, to batuachu de chozrim lemekomon lo erev, because he's certain that the mother bird is going to come back in the evening, so he considers himself the owner of the mother bird, even though technically he doesn't really have a kinyan, and therefore there's gezela of darchei shalom on the mother. And the way Rashi seems to understand, that gezela of darchei shalom applies to the eggs as well. The point over here, according to Rashi, is even though there is not full ownership, still it's considered gezel of darchei shalom, and that applies to the eggs just like it applies to the mother. And Tosas explain, if so, amay asurim mishum gezel. Again, why is there a prohibition of gezel? Tiafilu mishum darchei shalom, like Tosas understand that there shouldn't even be gezel because of darchei shalom. Umeshani, and then the Gemara answers, Ha'imon, we're going on the mother, and this is unlike Rashi, perush v'lo habeitzim, we're not going on the eggs, meaning there's no gezela whatsoever, not even because of darchei shalom on the eggs, but there is gezela ibnei darchei shalom on the mother bird. And Tosas continue, V'im Tomar, if you're going to ask, Imon nami hatzarech shiluach, isn't there a din of shiluach that you have to send away the mother bird? If there's a din to send away the mother bird, why is there an issue of gezela? And Tosas answer, V'yeshlomer, you can answer, Ki leka beitzim tachteh. We're talking about, let's say there are no eggs underneath her. At that point in time, then there wouldn't be shiluach, and you can say there's gezelim and darchei shalom. And Tosas continue and note, V'hu adin dehavi matzi l'meimer kasal kadaitach meikara. The Gemara could have answered, like the Gemara had initially thought, Abeitzim shenaflu yesh gezel gomer, that on the eggs that actually fall into the chotzer, it is considered gezel gomer, it's actual stealing. V'yaiman, and on the mother, yesh darchei shalom, that's gezelim ibnei darchei shalom, and that's what the Brisa was referring to. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another answer. Why is it Asuros Mishum Gezel in the Braisa? If again the eggs did not actually leave the mother bird, they didn't fall into the Chutzer. Liolam Abeitzim, really the stealing is going on the eggs. Umidenofik Ruba, but once the majority of the eggs come out, Daite Love, so then the owner's already thinking that he's the owner of these eggs, even though technically he's not. And that's why there's Gezelim and Nedarche Shalom on the eggs. And Rashi explains, if you want, I could say that the gazela is going on the eggs and not on the mother. And again, the idea is once the majority comes out, so then we say there is a problem of gazelim and nedarche shalom. And the Gemara continues, V'hashta damar Rav Yehuda Marav. Now that Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, Asr lizkos bebeitzim kolzman sheim rovetzatz aleim, that it's asr to take the eggs as long as the mother's upon them. Shenemar, like it says in the pasuk, Shaleach teshalach esoim, it says that you send off the mother bird, v'hodar es habonim tikach locha, then it says that you take the offspring. So afilu tema denaflo l'chatzera, you can even say that the case is that the eggs actually have fallen into his chutzer, and still, even in such a situation, kol heicha di'iu motzi zachi lei, if it's a situation where he's allowed to take the eggs, chatzero zachile, so then his chatzir is able to be zocha for him as well. But if it's a situation where he can't take the eggs, because again the mother bird's upon them, chatzero nami lo zachile, so then his chatzir can't create the kinyan either, and that's why if the chatzir does not create the kinyan, that's why there is a mitzvah over here of shiluach hakan. But the Gemara continues, if so, asuros begezelim nedarche shalom, again going back to the end of the Braisa, it says it's usher to take the eggs, and it's considered gezel nedarche shalom. So ida shalch, if the mother bird was sent away, gezel ma'alihu, so then the chutzner should acquire the eggs, and it should be full gezel, it shouldn't just be because of darche shalom. And ida lo shalch, if the mother bird was not sent away, haboy shalucha, so to take the eggs you need to send the mother bird away. We don't even need to discuss gezel in this situation. There's a different reason why the eggs cannot be taken. And Rashi explains, ida shalcha misha natalan, if the person who's taking the egg sent away the mother bird, so then gezela ma'alihu, so then it's considered gezela, because it was acquired by the chutzner. Whoever owns the chutzner is the real owner of the eggs, and therefore the person's not allowed to take it. Vida lo shalch, and if the person who's taking the eggs did not send away the mother bird, haboy shalucha, so in order to take the eggs, you need to send away the mother bird. V'ika iser shaleach t'shalach, you have the prohibition of shaleach t'shalach, v'hader es habonim tikach loch, ma'ir yegezel, so why do you have to talk about gezel for? If the mother bird was not sent away, there's anyways a violation in terms of shiluach hakan, of taking the eggs. And the Gemara continues and answers Bekatan. We're talking here where a minor is taking the eggs, and therefore the labar shiluachu, since he doesn't have the mitzvah of shiluach hakan, so he can take the eggs. The mother bird is still there, and so therefore the chutzner doesn't acquire anything. That's why it's not full gezel. But the Gemara continues, Katan bar darche shalamu. But if he's a katan, if he's a minor, so there's a concept that he can't steal because of darche shalam. We apply that to a minor, and the Gemara says, Hachi kamer. Here's what it means to say. Aviv shel katan chayev lahachzir lo. The father of the minor, he's going to need to return the eggs to the owner of the chutzner, but that's memnei darche shalom. That's only because of darche shalom, because since the mother bird wasn't sent away, the chutzner didn't actually acquire the eggs yet in that situation. It's only because of darche shalom that the father has to return the eggs. And Rashi explains, Hachi garsinan bekatan hadakatani darche shalom v'sulo, b'delo shilcha. We're talking about darche shalom and only darche shalom because the mother bird wasn't sent away. Uvekatan delav bar shiluach. We're talking about a katan who doesn't have a mitzvah of shiluach hakan, deino chayev b'mitzvahs, because he's not chayev in mitzvahs. And again, in this situation, you're going to apply darche shalom and say that the father has to return the eggs to the owner of the chutzner. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamaskir bayas l'chaveiro, if somebody rents a house to his friend l'shana for a year, meaning to say the person is paying per year and he's not paying per month. So nisabra hashana, if the year ends up becoming a leap year, nisabra l'socher, the renter gets the advantage. He doesn't have to pay any extra for that extra month. However, hiskir lo l'chadashim, let's say he rents it to him per month. So nisabra hashana, if a month is added to the year, it's a leap year, nisabra l'maskir. So then the landlord gets the benefit. He can charge him for that extra month because the entire arrangement was to pay per month. And the Mishnah continues, Maisa b'tzipore, there was an incident in Tzipore, Be'echad shesachar merchatz mechavero, a person rented a bathhouse from his friend, b'shneim asar zav l'shana, for 12 zahav per year, midinar zav l'chodesh, for a golden dinar per month. So essentially, both the year and the month were mentioned, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis.